The boss invited the cleaning lady just to humiliate her in front of everyone at the party, but she made him regret it. Augusto Belmont had always known how to charm with words. But those who really paid attention could hear the venom behind his soft tone. When he invited Valentina to the gala, he wore his usual mask, the mask of a generous, progressive, almost humane employer. "You've served this house so well. You deserve to be our special guest." The invitation sounded kind, almost touching. But for someone like him, kindness was nothing more than a tool of control. He never made a move without reason, and this one had a hidden purpose. Augusto's plan was simple: dress Valentina as an equal for one night, just to prove to the elite that she would never truly be one of them. He wanted to see her out of her usual environment of submission, so everyone could laugh as she tried to step into a world that, in their eyes, didn't belong to her. It was the same old cruelty, dressed up as opportunity. The kind of trap that doesn't require shouting, only fake smiles, calculated stares, and deafening silences. The intention was crystal clear: expose her, ridicule her, reduce her to a joke. Valentina had no idea. When she received the invitation, she thought that maybe, just maybe, her dedication had touched someone's heart. Maybe this was her chance to show she wasn't just the woman who scrubbed floors, but someone with history, beauty, and worth. The dress, the hair, the nerves, everything was prepared with hope. And Augusto watched from a distance, like someone sharpening a blade before execution. But what he never expected was that, by trying to humiliate her, he would awaken something in her that he would never be able to destroy. While helping organize her boss's office, Valentina stumbled upon an old box filled with design magazines. Curious, she opened one of the most elegant editions, and froze, heart pounding. There, on the center page, was herself. Younger, with fierce eyes and a dress that cost more than she now made in several years. The caption read, "Valentina Rossi, the face of the new sustainable luxury." For a moment, the world turned in slow motion. The invisible maid of the mansion had once been one of the most influential women in high society. Valentina Rossi wasn't just a name, she was a symbol. A name that stood for elegance, innovation, and sophistication in the world of fashion and business. Heir to a textile empire, she had once led a revolution on both runways and factory floors, demanding ethics, style, and purpose. She had dined at diplomatic tables, given interviews on international networks, and influenced political decisions with a handshake. She was respected, admired, envied, and yet, none of that seemed to match the woman who now silently cleaned bathrooms. The contrast was brutal, nearly unbearable. How could someone so remarkable become invisible? The answer lay buried in pains she herself had tried to forget. But that magazine photo lit a fire she thought had long gone out. It wasn't just a memory, it was identity. Valentina wasn't just the cleaning lady everyone ignored. She was a sleeping force, a name with a legacy. And the most ironic part? The very setting meant to humiliate her would become the stage for remembering who she truly was. The truth behind that magazine photo was darker than anyone could imagine. The Rossi family, once a symbol of prestige and business stability, fell in a way that was both brutal and sudden. Her father, blinded by greed and convinced he could multiply their fortune through risky financial gambles, destroyed in months what generations had taken to build. Millions evaporated like dust, and with them, the family's security. But the tragedy didn't stop at finances. In the middle of the collapse, Valentina's mother's health deteriorated rapidly, and her father, drowned in debt and shame, succumbed to guilt. Both parents were gone within a cruelly short span of time, leaving Valentina alone, exposed and completely unprepared to survive in a world where her last name no longer opened doors. In a matter of months, she went from cover girl to tenant in a tiny backroom basement. From hosting diplomats to asking for silence while collecting other people's trash. To survive, she buried the past. She took on a simple name, erased all traces of her legacy, and learned not to correct anyone who referred to her as the cleaning lady. Her new identity wasn't just a disguise, it was armor. The streets are merciless to those who fall from the top, and the prejudice against those who've lost it all is almost as cruel as the loss itself. But still, she walked with her head high. Maybe because, somewhere deep inside, a dormant seed was waiting for the right moment to bloom. Valentina remained silent for days, but inside, a storm brewed. The rediscovery of that photo and the memories of who she once was didn't crush her, they awakened her. For the first time in years, she didn't just want to survive. She wanted to reconnect with herself. And when she looked at the party invitation resting on her dresser, something shifted inside. It was no longer the trap of a cruel boss, it was an opportunity. Not for revenge, but for truth. Valentina decided she would attend the party, not as the invisible maid, but as the woman the world once applauded, the woman she had forgotten. That night, she thought of Helena Marchete, the old seamstress who once worked for the Rossi family. A humble woman who crafted dresses with the precision of a Renaissance artist. Valentina had grown up watching Helena turn plain fabric into masterpieces, and it was through her that Valentina learned to respect the process, the cut, the soul behind each garment. Now, after all these years, she decided to find her. Because if anyone could dress her with dignity, it wouldn't be a luxury brand. It would be Helena, with her calloused hands and eyes full of kindness. Helena welcomed her with a silent embrace. No explanations were needed, one look was enough. They spent 2 days sewing together. They laughed, cried, and remembered. With every stitch, Valentina wasn't just making a dress, she was reassembling her broken identity. She didn't choose sparkles or extravagance. She wanted something that said, "I'm here, and I owe nothing to anyone." And as the fabric took shape, she knew. It didn't matter how she would be received. For the first time in years, she would reclaim her story. Seeing Helena again felt like opening a window in a room long closed. Valentina, who for years had spoken only through silent gestures, now allowed herself to feel, and to be felt. Helena, with steady eyes and hair silvered by time, seemed to have waited for this moment just as much as Valentina had. "You've always had your own light, my girl," she said, as she took her measurements with gentle yet firm hands. There was no rush. It was as if the dress needed to be born from the inside out. On the day of the fitting, Valentina stood motionless in front of the mirror. The dress was red, deep, intense, made of pure silk, tailored not for the woman she had been, but for the one she had become. It wasn't flashy, but every seam carried strength. When she looked at herself, she saw more than elegance. She saw history, scars, resilience. Helena's eyes filled with tears as she opened an old drawer. From it, she pulled a small velvet case, a pair of earrings that once belonged to Valentina's mother. "You're still a Rossi, even if the world has forgotten." Before letting her go, Helena held her hands and said something Valentina would never forget. "Elegance has nothing to do with what you wear, but with how you carry yourself in the world. Walk with your head held high, not to seem superior, but to remember that you were never less than anyone." Valentina held on to those words like a shield. That night wasn't just about showing up at the party. It was about proving that behind the silent woman who cleaned the floors, there was someone time couldn't erase. That night, every movement Valentina made was calculated with the precision of a warrior heading into battle. The dress, carefully folded on the bed, wasn't just clothing, it was her armor. As she applied her lipstick in front of the mirror, she felt the weight of every year spent in silence, of every look that had passed right through her as if she were invisible. But something was different in that modest room. She wasn't trying to fit in anymore. She was reclaiming a space that had always been hers by right. As she secured her hair with steady hands, flashes from the past played like a slow-motion film. The runway shows, the diplomatic dinners, the business meetings, and then, the bathrooms, the buckets, the mops. But above all, she saw what had never left her: strength. A strength that didn't come from status, but from an unshakable faith in who she was. Valentina hadn't rebuilt herself to impress anyone. She had reconnected with something deeper, the certainty that her worth was never defined by anyone else's eyes. She took a deep breath before stepping out. The click of her heels on the floor announced a woman who refused to disappear. Every detail of her preparation wasn't vanity, it was healing. And the self-worth rising in her chest didn't come from praise, but from the courage it took to face what few could endure. That night wasn't about being accepted. It was about allowing herself to be seen, with everything she carried: glory, downfall, pain, and rebirth. And as she walked toward the door, she knew the world was waiting. She just didn't know yet how it would react. The ballroom was packed, shimmering gowns, tailored tuxedos, crystal glasses clinking in harmony. The elite laughed, toasted, commented on the day's headlines, until the subtle sound of heels echoed across the marble floor, cutting through the room like a dissonant note. Everyone turned. And there she stood, poised in the doorway as if she had never left. Valentina. The red dress flowed like fire in motion. For a moment, time hesitated, as if the universe itself had to adjust its focus to make room for her. The stares began to shift, from curiosity to disbelief, from arrogance to shame. There was no denying who had just arrived. One man near the front leaned in and whispered, "It's her, Valentina Rossi." The women, now uncomfortable in their expensive dresses, looked at her as if she were a mirror, revealing more than they cared to see. It wasn't just her beauty. It was her presence. The energy of someone who had fallen and returned stronger. The same woman who, just yesterday, was serving drinks in silence, now stood at the center of attention without saying a single word. Valentina didn't smile. She didn't look away either. She walked with grace, but with purpose, like someone who knew the ground beneath her feet, even after years away from it. Every step whispered a truth. Dignity isn't lost, it hides. And now, she had come to reclaim it. The very stage that had been set to humiliate her had become the backdrop of her rise. But not everyone was ready for the next act, especially not Augusto Belmont. A heavy silence fell over the room, replacing the usual hum of idle chatter. Every eye fixed on Valentina, as if she had shattered an invisible wall between two worlds that were never meant to meet. These were people accustomed to quick judgments and dismissive glances, now facing a paradox. The same woman they once ignored now stood before them, commanding the room with quiet power. And then, something unexpected happened. One by one, the most influential guests began to rise in recognition. The CEO of a multinational corporation, someone with weight in global circles, offered his hand. A renowned socialite, known for her cold demeanor, gave a genuine smile, rare and disarming. The name Valentina Rossi echoed through the air, not as gossip or whisper, but as a symbol. A symbol of power, resilience, and prestige. Those who once dismissed or overlooked her couldn't hide their shock and their admiration. The game had changed. Valentina was no longer just a faded figure from the past or a forgotten face from an old magazine. She was living proof that real power lies in the courage of those who refuse to be defined by their losses, but instead by what they still dare to build. And while the room honored her, Augusto watched from a distance, trying in vain to hide the disbelief in his eyes. Augusto Belmont was not a man who showed emotion. His expressions were always composed, his gestures precisely calculated. But that night, something slipped. A crack in the mask. Shame. The plan he'd crafted to ridicule Valentina was crumbling beneath the quiet applause, the respectful greetings, the reverence she received. It was like watching a play where the villain realizes, too late, that the victim held more power than he ever imagined. His smile froze. The glass of whiskey in his hand trembled slightly. As he watched, Belmont tried, desperately, to collect his thoughts. Who was this woman, really? The cleaning lady, who had scrubbed his floors with quiet precision, was now being treated as an equal, perhaps even a superior, by the very people he had spent his life trying to impress. He scoured his memory, scanned every interaction, every name, and couldn't believe he had missed it. Valentina was Valentina Rossi, a name he had heard in meetings, seen on magazine covers. Now standing before him, reborn. His mind spiraled. He had framed that invitation as a move of dominance, a reminder of who held power. But now, he was the one made small. Pathetically small. The party he had intended as a stage to assert control had become the setting for his quiet disgrace. And the worst part? She hadn't needed to say a single word. But what he didn't know yet was that the final blow was still to come. The scene felt like something from a film, too perfect, too poetic to be real. Valentina, dressed in her essence, not just in silk, was invited to sit at the main table. The table. The one reserved for the world's movers and shakers. She sat down naturally, needing no permission, no validation. At her side, ambassadors, diplomats, magnates, and none of them dared treat her as anything less. There was something in her gaze, calm but unwavering, that demanded respect effortlessly. She hadn't asked for a seat. She was the seat. During dinner, one of the distinguished guests asked, with genuine respect, what had led her away from the public eye. Valentina could have lied. She could have deflected. But she chose the truth, because now, there was nothing left to hide. With a voice serene but full of life, she spoke of the collapse. The fortune lost. The family's downfall. Her parents' early deaths. And her choice to disappear in order to survive. There was no victimhood in her voice, only dignity. It was as if every word had been purified by years of silence and rebuilding. As she spoke, the faces around her changed. Her story wasn't just moving, it was human. It wasn't the tale of a fallen socialite, it was the testimony of a woman who had endured the weight of oblivion without losing herself. Her gestures were the same as before, but now carried a new depth. The kind of strength only those who've scrubbed floors with their bare hands can understand. And even among the most powerful names in the room, it was her who now led the conversation. But the real impact of that night was only just beginning. Amid the refinement of the main table, Valentina spoke with the ease of someone who knows she has nothing to prove. There was no arrogance in her voice, only the calm conviction of someone who had lived what she was saying. I lost money, properties, social standing, but I never lost what truly matters: character, knowledge, and honor. The room fell silent. It was rare to hear someone so influential speak so plainly about values that can't be measured in bank statements. Valentina didn't speak to impress, she spoke to remind. She shared that before her fall, she had quietly invested a portion of her fortune into education projects in marginalized communities, funding schools, libraries, scholarships. She brought investors together and moved millions for social causes, even when no one was paying attention. I never felt the need to be seen doing it, she said. Because dignity doesn't require a spotlight. And there, among people who equated generosity with visibility, Valentina redefined what it meant to make an impact. More than her words, it was her presence that taught. Each gesture held a kind of grace that isn't taught in etiquette classes, but carved in the quiet of pain, and in the stubborn refusal to be corrupted. She wasn't there for revenge, nor to reclaim status. She was there to remind, with strength and sweetness, that true power doesn't come from what you wear, but from what no one can take, your essence. And in that room, where everything was surface level, Valentina's authenticity began to change the very air. The respectful silence around the table gave way to murmurs of admiration. One by one, guests who had once dismissed her now approached, not out of obligation, but out of genuine respect. Firm handshakes, sincere praise, knowing glances. Valentina had touched something deep, not just the memory of who she once was, but the recognition of who she had become. It was as if, finally, everyone saw that she was not a forgotten chapter of the elite, but a living testament to greatness, reinvention, and humanity. From a distance, Augusto watched the scene unfold, the bitter taste of shame on his tongue. 3 years of disdain, clipped orders, and dismissive looks now played like a humiliating reel in his mind. He swallowed hard. He was no longer the host of the night, just a background extra in the story of the woman he had tried to humiliate. And what hurt the most wasn't that he was wrong, it was realizing that Valentina had never once lost her composure. Not when she was invisible. Not now, when she was revered. That truth disarmed him completely. As the minutes passed, camera flashes turned almost exclusively to her. Journalists, columnists, power players, everyone wanted to know who Valentina Rossi was now. Not just the former heiress, but the woman who had faced oblivion without losing herself. In just a few quiet gestures, she had become the icon of the night. Not by flaunting power, but by embodying something money could never buy: authenticity. And in a world built on appearances, they all knew this was the only truth that mattered. While the guests were still adjusting to the sheer force of Valentina Rossi's presence, another layer of surprise began to unfold. She wasn't just an elegant figure from the past, she was a brilliant mind, quietly hidden beneath a janitor's uniform for 3 long years. That night, Valentina didn't avoid the complex conversations. On the contrary, she dove into them with the fluency of someone who owned the room. When she approached the French ambassador, the conversation flowed with such poise and linguistic finesse that several guests paused, captivated by her flawless French. She discussed international treaties, touched on geopolitics and climate security with such command that the ambassador personally introduced her to other diplomats as a woman of rare substance. Later, she was spotted standing before a controversial modern painting that had just been brought into the hall. A group of critics were debating its authenticity. With a thoughtful gaze and technical precision, Valentina gently dismantled their doubts with historical insight and aesthetic depth. A beat of silence followed, then a nod of deep approval from one of the country's most respected curators. That woman should be running museums, not cleaning windows. From circular economy models to impact investing, from historical preservation to avant-garde theory, Valentina navigated every subject with the ease of someone who had lived, studied, felt, and truly understood. With each exchange, another prejudice crumbled. She wasn't a mystery. She was a forgotten gem, now shining with all the light that time and others' judgment had tried to bury. In that hall of facades, Valentina had become the substance. There was no longer any doubt. Behind the quiet grace she had worn for years was a razor-sharp, visionary, brilliant mind. And now, the world was finally ready to see her. Amid all the sophisticated chatter of the evening, one detail brought an even deeper clarity about Valentina Rossi's true origin. A well-known collector mentioned, in passing, a recently exhibited Claude Monet, currently on loan from a noble Italian family. Valentina smiled, touched with a quiet nostalgia, and softly said, "That painting used to hang in my grandparents' salon in Florence." The silence that followed was pure astonishment. She didn't speak with pride, she spoke with longing. The revelation wasn't just about art. It was about roots, about culture, about a lineage steeped in history, refinement, and soul. Her family had once been patrons of the arts, supporters of young talents, guardians of rare collections that now lived in the world's most prestigious archives. Valentina knew every brushstroke, every artistic movement, as someone who had met the creators, and in many cases, she had. She had grown up beneath Venetian chandeliers, listening to debates on literature, philosophy, and classical music. Her education wasn't just formal, it was deeply humanist, richly intellectual, beautifully cultivated. The name Rossi no longer echoed just as old money, but as a cultural legacy that time had failed to erase. And there she was, the rightful heir not of fortune, but of sensibility, of beauty, of timeless thought. That night, it became clear to everyone. Valentina hadn't merely returned. She had, in front of the entire social order, reconnected with a legacy. Not the inheritance of wealth that was lost, but the one of culture, of soul, of the elevated spirit that had never left her. Valentina looked around the hall, not as the woman of the hour, not as the celebrated guest. Her gaze traveled beyond the shimmer of crystal and whispered praise, toward the scars only she remembered. With quiet elegance, she stood and, without warning, asked for the floor. It wasn't a rehearsed speech. It was the calm release of someone who had faced collapse, and still chose to rise. "Rebuilding yourself after a public fall isn't glamorous," she began, locking eyes with the businessmen around her. It's a silent war. The room held its breath. She spoke of how, after the devastating bankruptcy, she knocked on doors that had once opened automatically. How she watched invitations vanish, contracts dissolve, smiles turn cold. I became radioactive to many, she admitted. But I knew. Character, vision, and knowledge do not go bankrupt. Amid the refinement of the main table, Valentina spoke with the ease of someone who knew she had nothing to prove. There was no arrogance in her voice, only the steadiness of someone who had lived what she was saying. I lost money, property, social standing, but I never lost what truly matters: character, knowledge, and honor. Silence settled over the room. It was rare to hear someone so influential speak so clearly about values that don't fit on a bank statement. Valentina wasn't speaking to impress, she was speaking to remind. She shared how, before the fall, she had devoted a portion of her personal wealth to educational initiatives in marginalized communities. She funded schools, libraries, scholarships. She rallied investors and moved millions for social causes, even when no one was watching. I never cared about being seen in those actions, she said, because dignity doesn't need a spotlight. There, among people who thought generosity was synonymous with visibility, Valentina redefined what it truly meant to have impact. More than her words, it was her presence that taught. Every gesture carried a kind of elegance not learned in etiquette classes, but forged in pain, and in the conscious decision not to corrupt oneself. She wasn't there for revenge. She wasn't there to reclaim status. She was there to remind them, with grace and force, that true power doesn't come from what you wear, but from what no one can take from you, your essence. And in that hall of appearances, Valentina's authenticity began to shift the air. The respectful silence around the table gave way to murmurs of admiration. One by one, guests who had previously ignored her now approached Valentina, not out of duty, but out of respect. Handshakes, honest compliments, shared glances of quiet reverence. Valentina had struck something deep, not just the memory of who she once was, but recognition of who she had become. It was as if, finally, everyone saw that she wasn't some forgotten chapter of the elite, but a living reference of greatness, reinvention, and humanity. From a distance, Augusto watched it all unfold, the bitterness of shame rising in his throat. 3 years of cold dismissals, clipped commands, and sideways glances now played back like a humiliating film. He swallowed hard. He was no longer the host of the evening, just a background figure in the narrative of the woman he tried to humiliate. What stung wasn't just the mistake. It was the fact that Valentina had never lost her composure. Not when she was ignored, and not now, as she was being celebrated. That, more than anything, disarmed him. As the minutes passed, the flashes of cameras began to center almost entirely on her. Journalists, columnists, and influential figures all wanted to know, who was Valentina today? Not just the former heiress, but the woman who had faced ruin without losing her essence. In a matter of moments, she had become the icon of the evening. Not by flaunting power, but by embodying the one thing money can't buy: authenticity. And in a world driven by appearances, everyone knew that was the only truth that mattered. As guests still absorbed the commanding presence of Valentina Rossi, a deeper layer of surprise began to unfold. She wasn't just a graceful figure from the past. She was a brilliant mind, silently hidden beneath a janitor's uniform for 3 long years. That night, Valentina didn't shy away from complex conversations. She dove into them with the ease of someone who truly mastered the subjects. When she approached the French ambassador, the conversation flowed in fluent, elegant French. People stopped just to listen to the impeccable accent flowing from her mouth. She discussed international accords, climate security, geopolitical shifts, with such depth and clarity that the ambassador soon introduced her to other diplomats as a woman of rare substance. Shortly after, she was seen in front of a newly arrived painting, a controversial contemporary piece. A group of critics debated its authenticity. Valentina, with a discerning eye and grounded argument, unraveled the mystery with historical precision and artistic sensitivity. There was a brief hush, then a nod of genuine awe from one of the country's most respected curators. That woman should be running museums, not washing windows. Talks on circular economy, social impact investing, preservation of historical heritage. Valentina moved through every subject with the authority of someone who had lived, studied, observed, and felt them. With each new exchange, another prejudice crumbled. She wasn't a mystery. She was a forgotten gem, now shining with all the brilliance that time and judgment had tried to extinguish. In that room of facades, Valentina had become the content. There was no doubt left. Behind the quiet posture she had worn for years was a visionary, sharp, luminous mind. And now, the world was finally ready to see her. Amid the evening's refined conversations, one detail cast even more light on Valentina Rossi's true origin. It came when a renowned collector casually mentioned a Claude Monet piece recently exhibited in Europe, on loan from an old, noble Italian family. Valentina smiled with quiet nostalgia, and in a calm, steady voice, revealed, "That painting used to hang in my grandparents' salon in Florence." The silence that followed was pure astonishment. She wasn't boasting. She was remembering. And the revelation wasn't just about art. It was about lineage, culture, a heritage that breathed history, beauty, and tradition. Her family had once been patrons of the arts, benefactors of young talent, collectors of rare works now housed in the world's most prestigious collections. Valentina knew each brushstroke, each artistic movement, as someone who had met the artists in person. And often she had. She had grown up in halls lit by Venetian chandeliers, listening to debates on literature, philosophy, and classical music. Her education was not just formal, it was profoundly humanistic, plural, and refined. The name Rossi echoed not only as a symbol of ancient wealth, but of a cultural legacy that time had not erased. And there she stood, a rightful heir to a lineage that didn't just possess art, but understood its value, its soul, its eternity. That night, one thing became clear. Valentina hadn't simply returned. She had, in front of all society, restored the link with her true inheritance. Not the money that was lost, but the culture, the sophistication, and the elevated spirit that had never left her. Valentina looked around the hall, but not as the woman of the hour. Her gaze went beyond the shimmer of champagne flutes and whispered praise. It reached the scars only she could see. With quiet elegance, she stood, and, without warning, asked to speak. It wasn't a rehearsed speech. It was a calm release from someone who had known collapse, and still chose to rebuild. Rising after a public fall isn't glamorous. It's a silent war, she began, looking straight at the business elite in the room. The corporate world is cruel. It forgets your wins in a second, but never your failures. The room fell silent again. She told them how, after the collapse, she knocked on doors that had always been open. How invitations vanished, contracts dissolved, smiles turned cold. I became radioactive to many, she confessed. But I knew character, vision, and knowledge don't go bankrupt. She spoke of the value of credibility, of the invisible but vital weight of trust. The kind you can't buy, the kind you don't inherit, the kind you build in silence, through consistency. The market might applaud you one day and bury you the next. But when your essence is solid, you rise again. Valentina didn't apologize for having failed. She raised her voice to affirm that failure had been the cost of daring. And though she had lost everything, she never gave up ethics, intelligence, or courage. In that moment, she wasn't just an elegant woman. She was the living symbol of resilience. And even the most powerful in that room felt small before the quiet greatness of someone who fell, and rose with more dignity than most will ever have in victory. In the makeshift meeting room Augusto had set up, Valentina spoke with unshakable confidence about strategy, investments, calculated risks. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't hope to be heard. She was heard. And every word shifted the air in the room, turned heads, sparked frantic notes. The submissive employee had vanished. In her place stood the strategic mind Augusto had pretended not to see for 3 long years. The power dynamic inside that house had changed. In business, too. Valentina wasn't after revenge. She was after respect. And now, she was commanding every glance with the sheer force of her presence. Not as the woman who fell, but as the woman who rebuilt herself. She walked onto the balcony, where Augusto sat buried in reports, his expression tight. He didn't look up at first, perhaps out of pride, perhaps afraid to face what he'd ignored for so long. But a single sentence made him raise his head. "I have a proposal." Valentina stood tall, firm, unshaken. There was no pleading in her voice. Only clarity. Challenge. 1 week, she continued. 7 days of strategic consulting. I want full access to company data. If I don't deliver results by the end of that week, I walk away, and we go our separate ways. He nodded, cautiously, until she added, "But there's one condition. During that week, I won't wash dishes, sweep floors, or answer doors. My time, my focus, and my mind will be entirely dedicated to what actually matters. The numbers, the strategy, the future." The woman he once thought fragile was now setting terms. Not out of arrogance, but because she knew her worth. Augusto hesitated, and then nodded again. This time, not out of pity, but out of respect. Sitting face to face in the conference room, Augusto listened in silence as Valentina laid out a brutally honest diagnosis. Belmont is stagnant. Zero growth in recent quarters. Key contracts slipping into the hands of bolder competitors. Each sentence was a bitter pill to swallow, but there was no room left for denial. It was time to face the facts. Valentina wasn't just there to point out what was wrong. She brought solutions. She proposed expanding the company's scope, exploring new niches and sustainable business models. She referenced global case studies, presented market data, and highlighted high-impact opportunities in Latin America and Europe. Her vision was bold, forward-thinking, unlike anything Augusto had ever seen. When she finished, the only sound in the room was a breath held too long. Augusto felt the ground shift beneath him, not because of the company's crisis, but because of the power of the woman standing before him. Valentina was no longer an employee. She was the leader he never had the wisdom to recognize. And now, the fate of Belmont depended on one thing: the courage to listen, to trust, to change. In the dim light of his office, Augusto finally let his guard down. "You know why I never took big risks," he confessed. "Because I was always afraid of losing everything." His voice trembled, raw, exposed. Behind the mask of the strong businessman was a man paralyzed by fear. Valentina listened, respectfully, but not passively. She stepped closer, without judgment, and shared a story of her own. "My father risked everything on a project no one believed in. He lost a lot, but he gained respect, vision, courage." Her story wasn't about quick wins, it was about daring to move, even when you're terrified. She didn't speak as a consultant. She spoke as someone who had lived the fall, and risen. Augusto looked down. For the first time, he didn't feel attacked. He felt challenged to grow. "You don't have to be reckless," she said softly. "You just have to stop standing still." Her words hung in the air, reverberating long after the conversation ended. Maybe, deep down, he had always known change was necessary. But now, finally, he had someone beside him who saw what he could become, not just what he was afraid to lose. With the projector humming and the room dead silent, Valentina unveiled a new map of opportunities. Latin America is hungry for sustainable, affordable solutions. And we could be the first to bring real innovation. She spoke with fire in her voice, pointing to charts, forecasts, feasibility reports. Augusto watched, astonished by her clarity. But her plan went far beyond profits. It involved partnerships with local governments, international banks, and NGOs focused on affordable housing. She presented pilot projects in Peru, Colombia, and Brazil, a fusion of smart construction, environmental responsibility, and long-term social impact. "This isn't just business," she said. "This is legacy." Augusto, who once feared leaving Boston, now saw new frontiers opening before him. The old family firm, once tethered to conventional deals, could become a symbol of innovation and inclusion. And it all began with the courage to follow a daring vision. "Let's build where no one else had the courage to begin," she concluded. And in that moment, a new horizon was born. Valentina spoke with the authority of someone who had walked through fire and come out forged. "My Harvard degree wasn't just a title, it was a gateway, a portal into a global network of leaders and innovators." She explained how academic lessons merged with the hands-on experience of managing her family's company, shaping her strategic, resilient outlook. Her insight wasn't theoretical. It was real. She stressed that in business, authentic relationships are everything. Connections built on integrity and transparency outlast any storm. She gave examples of international partners who stood by her, even in crisis, proof of the credibility and trust she had earned. A silent network of power, underestimated by many. Augusto listened intently, slowly realizing that Valentina was not a gamble, but a gateway. Her international prestige was more than reputation. It was a key. A path to markets once closed, and now within reach. This was no longer just about numbers. This was the beginning of a new chapter, where legacy, leadership, and reputation converged. In every video conference, Valentina radiated presence. She switched effortlessly between French and Spanish, her voice clear, confident, and commanding. She understood that strategy alone wasn't enough. It took communication to seal international deals. And when she spoke, people listened. Partners sensed it instantly. She was a leader, prepared, persuasive, and unwavering. Her talent, however, extended far beyond language. It was her instinct to read the room, anticipate concerns, offer solutions. With patience and precision, she turned tentative talks into firm commitments. What others saw as impossible deals, she transformed into tangible results. Every signed contract was a silent victory, earned not through noise, but through diplomacy and resolve. Her fluency, her cultural sensitivity, they became vital bridges. And through those bridges, Belmont expanded. To the world, she wasn't just a businesswoman. She was a force, a negotiator who never lost focus, a connector of worlds, and the quiet architect of a company's global rebirth. Valentina knew that in the business world, the past doesn't define the future, nor does fleeting social status. She always repeated that competence and integrity are the most valuable currencies in any negotiation. It didn't matter if someone had once been powerful or invisible. What truly matters is what a person delivers, day after day, with excellence. She taught, through practical examples, that respect isn't bought with titles or names, but earned through consistent results and transparency in actions. She told stories of entrepreneurs who started from nothing and became references precisely because they never abandoned ethics and commitment. For Valentina, these were the true pillars of lasting success. In her daily interactions, she made it clear that humility and continuous learning are signs of strength, not weakness, and that treating others with dignity and recognition strengthens alliances and opens doors. Her lesson was simple but powerful. In the game of business, those who win are those who add real value, regardless of past or surname. Within just a few months, the partnership between Valentina and Belmont Productions began to deliver impressive results. New international contracts were signed, opening doors across Latin America and Europe. The strategy of sustainable, innovative expansion won clients previously unimaginable, transforming the company's vision. Belmont's revenue skyrocketed, reflecting not just the volume of business, but the quality of the partnerships formed. Each contract was a step toward consolidating the company as a leader in sustainable and socially responsible construction. Valentina led firmly, ensuring that growth was solid and consistent, never losing sight of the company's core essence. More than numbers, success brought influence. The company gained recognition at international events, and its name became synonymous with innovation and ethics in the sector. Valentina wasn't just rebuilding a brand, she was writing a new story, one where financial success walked hand in hand with positive impact on the world. Augusto began to realize that his conservative and arrogant attitude had been an obstacle not only to the company but to his own personal growth. Acknowledging past mistakes was not easy, but it was the first step toward true transformation. He started listening more, valuing others' opinions, and accepting that he didn't know everything, something he had never admitted before. Over time, Augusto learned that prosperity goes beyond the numbers on a balance sheet. It's about creating real value, building trust-based relationships, and investing in purposeful innovation. He saw that a true leader doesn't impose, he inspires and serves, guiding his team beyond immediate profit. This shift began to reflect throughout the company, which gained energy and dynamism. More than business, Augusto was changing as a person. Learning to grow alongside Valentina and embrace new ideas was a lesson in humility and courage. The path to success was no longer a solitary battle, but a shared journey where admitting one's own mistakes opened doors to a more promising and sustainable future. One quiet day, Valentina visited the cemetery where her parents rested, a place filled with memories and silence. There, among fresh flowers and the soft sunlight, she felt a deep connection to her roots, a bond that transcended time and pain. It was a moment of stillness, but also of acknowledgement, of what was lost and what remained alive within her. As she rested her hands on the gravestone, she recalled stories from her childhood, lessons and values passed down by her parents. The visit brought a sense of peace, as if sealing a pact of respect and gratitude. The past, once a source of pain and shame, began to transform into strength and inspiration for the steps yet to come. In that moment, Valentina understood that true legacy is not in material wealth but in love and teachings that shaped her character. The visit was a return to origins, a reunion with herself that prepared her to move forward with a lighter soul and a heart full of hope. In the grand auditorium, the lights dimmed briefly, and when they came back on, a name echoed powerfully: Valentina Rossi, Businesswoman of the Year. The audience rose to their feet, applauding not only her success but the journey of overcoming that brought her there. The woman once invisible now shone at the center of attention, a symbol of strength and resilience. In her speech, Valentina spoke with emotion and wisdom. She shared her struggles, the hard path that transformed a cleaner into a business leader. She emphasized the importance of dignity, character, and purpose in every decision. Her message touched hearts, showing that true leadership is made of courage and positive societal impact. The perception of the business elite changed forever. Valentina was no longer seen as the former domestic worker or fallen heiress but as a visionary who earned her place with merit and determination. The award was more than a tribute, it was the crowning of a woman who rewrote her destiny and inspired a generation. Valentina met a young man who, like her, had lost everything and sought a new beginning. He was full of doubts and fears, unsure of what the future held. With patience, she listened to his story and saw in it the same silent struggle she had faced years ago. The meeting was a moment of deep connection and hope. She shared simple but powerful advice. Dignity is the foundation of any rebuilding. Honest work, even if humble, strengthens character and opens unexpected doors. Valentina reinforced that no one restarts alone. It's necessary to surround yourself with people who believe in your potential and seek opportunities, even in the toughest situations. More than words, Valentina offered a living example of overcoming. She showed that the past doesn't define the future, and that the courage to change comes from within. By inspiring that young man, she planted a seed of hope, reminding everyone that restarting is possible, and that every purposeful step is a victory in itself. Over time, Valentina realized her role went far beyond business. She promoted Sofia, her loyal ally, to lead the new international branch, recognizing her talent and dedication. The expansion was marked by sensitivity and purpose, not just growth, but real transformation. The new headquarters reflected the values that drove them: ethics, innovation, and human impact. As part of the legacy she wanted to leave, Valentina allocated part of the company's profits to fund a pediatric hospital in Chile. The project was personal, a promise made to the past that was now coming to life in the present. Vulnerable children would have access to dignified care, in a space designed with love and excellence. It was more than charity, it was social justice. Valentina became a symbol of transformation and lasting impact. From a disbelieved woman to a globally admired leader, her journey inspired thousands to believe in their own new beginnings. She proved that true success is one that bears fruits beyond itself. And above all, she showed that when purpose and courage unite, legacy becomes eternal. And if Valentina's story touched your heart, pause for a moment. How many people do you know who are just waiting for a chance to start over? Share this video with someone who needs to remember, it's never too late.